Very pleased to be joined on this episode of the Warning Podcast by David Rothkopf, a Daily Beast columnist and host of Deep State Radio. I think he's one of the best and most insightful writers out there talking about this moment in time. David, welcome.
Nice to be here.
How do you see it? What's going on in 2023 America as we get ready to make the turn into the election year?
There's certainly a lot to be worried about. The irrationality of the degree of support for essentially a proven criminal to be president of the United States casts every judgment one could make into doubt. Here you have somebody who was impeached twice, and we all know the litany of his wrongs, any one of which should have disqualified him since he appeared on the scene, which was now 8 years ago. And yet, at this particular moment, his control over the Republican Party seems stronger than it's ever been, even with all these trials, even with all we know about it. And so it becomes very difficult in that kind of circumstance to say, well, the rational analysis, which is that he's unfit, that people know he's unfit, that the policies he's proposing actually work against them, not for them, that he's likely to end democracy and strip away their fundamental freedoms, those things don't seem to hold. And, it's the kind of thing you've been talking about for a long, long time. It's very disorienting, as to anybody who looks at this scene and tries to draw logical conclusions.
There's the apocryphal quote by Upton Sinclair that when fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying the cross. Is fascism the right word? I've used it for a long time, and I think we're well across the line.
Yeah, it's absolutely the right word. I mean, they are using all the tools of fascists, from threats of force, bullying, singling out scapegoat groups in society, disinformation, attacks on institutions, on the rule of law. So yeah, they are fascists, and that quote, bears a lot of scrutiny. With the ascension of Mike Johnson to be Speaker of the House, a man who asserts that a few weeks prior to becoming Speaker to the House, God spoke to him and said that he was going to have to play the role of Moses, which should have somebody carting him off to a padded cell someplace, instead was a signal to millions of evangelical supporters of the far right to say, this is our moment. We are at the doorstep of a theocracy. That's what we've wanted all along. Stick with me, I'll get you there.
There is a fairly well reported story about Stephen Miller, where Stephen Miller is in the Oval Office and General Milley turns towards him and says, quote, "Shut the fuck up, Stephen," end quote. And the occasion of this is Stephen Miller speculating about using the U.S. military to strike at refugee boats somewhere off the coast of Mexico, outside of America's territorial waters, but killing all of the people on the boat. So I know for sure, right, that Stephen Miller, no compunction whatsoever about killing those people. None whatsoever. I know that Trump had a hesitation about shooting the black people in front of the White House. He didn't want to use lethal force. He just wanted to shoot them in the legs, in the kneecaps. And that was the question that he asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if the military could shoot them in the leg. My question is, with Speaker Johnson, who said what you said he said, plus believes that people and dinosaurs were walking around with each other 6,000 years ago. Is he a fanatic? Is he a terribly naive, will believe anything type of person? He just can't distinguish what's real or not? Or is he a genuinely fanatical, theocratic character who, with a pleasant demeanor, looks and says, I believe everything that's in the Bible, that guy would kill you in a millisecond, just like the Taliban would, for deviating from his theocratic line? My question is, when you look at these people, how do you evaluate that? Do you worry about it? Do you worry about that this person, if they could, would lock you up, would send you away, would take away your property and possessions? How, how do you process these people in this moment and their danger?
Well, I think on the one hand, you have to take their threats extremely seriously. And I go back to your reference to Stephen Miller. I wrote a book about a year ago called American Resistance, and I talked to 100 people in the Trump administration who saw this up close and who said, we can't risk another Trump term. These include cabinet members. I spoke to cabinet members who said he would bring up ideas like that regularly. He regularly brought up the idea of firing missiles at the caravans coming across Mexico, of putting a moat at the southern border and filling it with crocodiles, of bringing troops to the southern border and having them shoot at people coming across the border. He still, to this day, talks about using the Insurrection Act to put people down. He says that he aspires to having the power of foreign dictators who put their opponents in jail or to death. And he's got people in his small universe of toadies, like Stephen Miller, like Kash Patel, other people who go out there who say, yeah, we're going to arrest media critics. We're going to throw them in jail. We're going to silence them. So, I don't have to know whether they think that's founded in some kind of ethical ideology that, is impossible to fathom, or whether they think that's a line that appeals to the base. I don't have to know whether they're insincere or not regarding their motives. I know that in practice, this is something that they have tried to do. And I think the same is true with Mike Johnson. I've talked to people who followed him very closely on the Hill. They see him as, so fanatic that he makes, Mike Pence look like, rational, non-sectarian kind of representative of the scientific community, because he does believe in the Flintstones version of of the world, people and dinosaurs together at the same time. But the other thing that he believes is that gay people shouldn't be allowed to marry each other. that gay sex is an abomination and it should be illegal, that women should control their own bodies. And this, again, we don't have to know whether the people who say these things are grounded in deep religiosity or whether they are cynical politicians seeking to seize the moment. What we know is that they're women whose lives are in jeopardy in places like Texas who can't get the health care they need, who have to flee the state. And that it's not just Texas, it's multiple states, and the number is growing and growing. So they're translating these extreme ideologies like the Taliban into the rule of law, and it's happening at a stunning rate. So, I mean, I'd be interested to know whether he is insincere or whether he's as stupid as he appears to be. But I will fear him whether he's sincere or not.
And that seems to me to have always been the main point, which is that you have to take these people literally and seriously because there's only a couple of ways that the republic falls. And a couple of them have no possibility of happening in the United States. We will never have a Colonel Gaddafi type coup, right? We will not have a junta of colonels. If our democracy falls or is profoundly degraded, it will happen over a successive series of elections, beginning in 2024 with Donald Trump being elected, with this plan conceived at the Claremont Institute and at the Heritage Foundation implemented, which really fundamentally disassembles the federal government, destroys the civil service, cronyizes government at a moment in history when it is far larger, more sophisticated than anything could have been conceived in the heyday of Tammany, for instance. And so it will lead to a epic type of corruption that is fully banana Republican as it plays out. But why do you think that the alarm has not reached people as a general proposition in the country in a way that, hey, these guys keep saying that they're going to do this if you vote for them. And there has never been an instance, ever, never in human history, where the people who said, I'm going to lock you up, where I'm going to deport millions of people, where I'm going to open up camps to hold them in, where they didn't do it. I mean, 100% of the time, that people who got elected on that platform promising to take down the democracy along with it, in his case, retribution and revenge. There's exactly zero examples of people saying that were just saying it for show. They all mean it. And there seems to be an incapacity in the country to appreciate that the person saying these things, who may be elected within a year, means them very sincerely.
There's several factors. One factor dates back to Ronald Reagan. It's the minimization of the importance of government. It's 40 years of hearing that government is the problem, not the solution. And a lot of people out there, because they've heard this, don't think it matters very much what happens in Washington. Don't take it as seriously as they should. Another factor is ignorance. A lot of people either don't care to know or they listen to information sources that describe the world not as it is, but as a bunch of ideologues would like you to see it. And so they're in this Fox News, information system, and so they don't have the truth at their disposal. There's another group that's angry at the world and wants to lash out and thinks that, you know, Trump and these others are going to finally strike back at the elites and the others who they resent because they're having, they think, better lives than they are. And I think we could probably find some other explanations for this, including among evangelicals, a desire that there is, or a sense that God wants them to pursue a particular path. That their particular religious beliefs say, even though this man who is leading us is deeply flawed, if he bans abortion, if he bans gay sex, if he does the things that are aligned with our religious tenets, that he is serving the mission of our God. And so you've got, when you take all these groups, tens of millions of people, 30% of the US electorate, maybe it's 40% of the US electorate. And when you have that, you all of a sudden become within striking distance of seizing power. And power itself is an aphrodisiac. There are plenty of plenty of people who in 2015, 2016 said, that Trump, he is dangerous.
All of them.
But if he offers me a good enough job, I can fix it. Let me into the government. And they sort of went along with it. They validated it. One of the great shocking stories, of the past 10 years is that the Republican establishment just sat on their hands. Where was the Bush family in all of this? Now you have Liz Cheney out there as a voice, and more power to her. But there was this kind of, well, let's see how this goes. And so all these forces together create the kind of situation where you can have this guy come in who has no ideology. He's a narcissist. All he cares about is himself. He doesn't believe America should be X or Y or Z. He doesn't care. He believes America should serve his interests. He sees it through the eyes of somebody who's deeply psychologically disturbed and sees all of us as supporting characters in his movie. And that, it's kind of the most disturbing thing of all, because his worldview is so warped, and his sense of that public service is so negligible that he has no sense of obligation to the people. He believes the people are obligated to him.
All of those things that you just said, are, from my perspective, indisputably true and inarguable. Here's my question. Why is he beating the Democrats right now? Why is he winning? And he is winning. If the election were tomorrow, he would win the election. Why is he winning? Why is this movement better organized, better funded, and more dangerous today than it was on January 6th, in your view? And I think it's incontestable that it is.
Well, I think he's certainly very strong. And I think we could have an interesting debate about whether he's winning or he's competitive. But he's either within striking distance of winning or he's winning. So this is a moot point, really, because we've got to ask, given that all these things are incontestable, how could that happen? And I think, you've got the support of these groups. You've got um, the weakness of the other leadership within the Republican Party towards this. Um, and I think there is a kind of almost a sense of inevitability that has settled in over the Republican Party with regard to this race. Um, and perhaps some of it has to do with the fact that he's a nasty piece of work and that he could win. And if he could win and he's a nasty piece of work, he can really do some damage to the people who oppose him. And I think there are some people who are just afraid. I think some of it has to do with the fact that Democrats have not come at him as strongly, as regularly, in as targeted a way as they should. Now, part of that, I give credit to President Biden, right? He said, no, I'm going to govern. I'm going to do a good job. I think ultimately that's going to work. And if you talk to the people close to him, they'll say it worked the first time. He beat Trump the first time. It gets him across the line with certain swing groups of voters that will ultimately lead him to prevail. Being a good president matters. Um, and while I think that may be true, and we've seen Democrats outperform opinion polls for the past several years for a variety of reasons that don't really have to do directly with Trump or Biden, have to do with things like Roe v. Wade. And that may continue. Uh, the stakes are so high. The stakes are so high here that it's 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 critical that um, the campaign against Trump, the double-barreled campaign in every battleground state, to convince voters that they will lose democracy, that they will lose fundamental rights, that they will not be able to marry who they want or buy a contraceptive or have certain kinds of health care or have the freedom to um, listen to dissenting points of view or perhaps ever again participate in an election. That's got to be brought home in a way that it's not happening right now. And to me, that's where the urgency is, particularly in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona and New Mexico and Georgia and North Carolina and the states that we would determine as battleground states. Because we've seen what happened. We saw what happened in 2016. We saw 70,000 people be the difference between having a sensible, effective president and having a lunatic as president. And we also saw third-party candidates back then. In places like Michigan, Jill Stein got enough votes that had they gone to Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump wouldn't have been president. And we've got this phenomenon now where you've got, Robert F. Kennedy and you've got Jill Stein and you've got Cornel West, and you may or may not have no labels. And that's, those are really, really frightening things. And they require massive counter campaigns and not, in a long time. We're recording this in the middle of December. In a month, the Iowa caucuses are going to happen. It's here. We're in the middle of this.
So when you go through that list of third-party candidates, Bobby Kennedy right now is 25% of the vote. And Cornel West is at 3 to 5. You put Jill Stein with 2 to 3. You look at Joe Manchin, and if he were to run with a Republican, you look at Liz Cheney speculating about this. Let me posit this and tell you what I think that may be. So 8 years on, with Donald Trump, the dominant cultural figure, what we're seeing is almost the ice cleaving from the glacier, if you will. We are seeing the crack up of the two-party system. The Republican Party has utterly failed as an institution, and the Democratic Party has failed to maintain its coalition, and in part has failed in that it hasn't completely repudiated or stopped or made the case to repudiate or stop, however you want to process it, the MAGA movement. And what we're seeing is the birth of kind of a multi-party coalition type democracy in a binary system that could certainly accrue to elect an authoritarian candidate. Because the one thing that no one's talking about is the reality that with that many candidates, this becomes a 30 to 45 state race, not a 3 state, 70,000 vote race. And two, the delta between 0 and 300 electoral votes in a multiple candidate race is the delta between about 31 and 39% of the vote. And so it becomes an infinitely more complex political campaign if you have more than two people that are polling up around that 30% mark, let alone one at 30%, and three or four others in there at that 5% mark. But the Democrats don't get a vote, right, on the proposition if any of these people are going to do it, right? They have a right to do it. You have to be able to figure out how to win the election, right, in that circumstance. And so I guess my question to you is that as we kind of come into 2024, what do you think that Biden needs to say to the country? Do we need to see more of him during the week? Does he need to be on Trump every day? Does somebody need to be on him every day? Um, how do you see it? Um, I'm a hardliner on this. Trump needs to be engaged, nonstop, every second of every minute of every hour of every day until this is over.
I'm with you 100%. I will leave it to political strategists to determine who should be out there. But somebody needs to be out there in every one of these states. I don't necessarily need Joe Biden to be in Texas right now, but I do need to see a bunch of women who are fearing for their lives because they don't have the right to get the health care they need. I do need to see other people who are current or potential victims of the policies of Donald Trump, of the Republican Party, of the MAGA movement every day. And, we live in a world where that can mean videos on social media, it can mean live events, it can mean appearances on cable news channels. It should mean all of those things. So I'm with you. I'm not just an absolutist. I'm a maximalist. If there's something we can be doing, we should be doing it. And in my sense, this is a one issue election. Do you want to continue to have democracy in the United States of America? And I'll tell you something. As somebody who writes a column, who's on TV a couple of times a week, who goes out and give talks and so forth, it has affected how I behave. There are issues that I've got with how the Biden administration behaves. I generally do not raise them because I don't think that they can or should be weakened in any way. want to ensure that the message that people get, and you may say, well, that's your thumb. Well, I'm an opinion writer, first of all, but secondly, um, the stakes are too high. The stakes are far too high. And when I see people saying, well, he's got a bad policy in Gaza, and that's going to lead to Muslim Americans not voting for him. I'm like, somebody's got to be out there and saying, are you kidding me? You're going to vote for the guy who put in place the Muslim ban? You're going to vote for a guy who said he was going to do it again? You're going to vote for somebody who is fundamentally racist and wants to keep brown people out of the United States? You're going to vote for the guy who's supported by the MAGA Christians? I mean, who want to impose a certain kind of theocratic view on the United States. But that's, that goes to your point. Every single time it is possible to challenge him, he needs to be challenged.
Is there a method of challenging him that has not been employed that should be?
I don't think he is challenged enough on issues of truth. I saw there's a little change, and I saw, Ron Johnson was on CNN the other day, and afterwards, Caitlin Collins fact checked it, in a real hard way. And we've seen Trump get up and lie in a lot of forums, televised forums, town halls. I don't think he should ever be given a live mic. If you're going to do an interview, do it on tape, fact check it, put the fact checked up there. I think that the fact that he's a pathological liar, and the fact that he's trying to lie in order to get the votes of the American people, that's something that needs to be called.
I did a podcast the other day with Evan Schmidt of the Texas Tribune, who I think is a highly ethical, deeply serious, very thoughtful journalist and observer of American life, this moment, the collapse of local news. And we're having this conversation, and I grew up in central New Jersey, and the news, right, such as it was turn the news on. And what that meant was Bill Butel at Eyewitness Action News, Channel 7. It meant Frank Reynolds, in my era growing up on ABC News, and that was the news. And on the news were reports of significant events that happened. And a couple times a year, there would be breaking news. And if there was breaking news, there was something very serious that happened, right? That occurred. That was shattering. So I'm thinking about that, right? Because this is anchored in how I grew up and the world I grew up in. And the news, such as it is, that comes across my feed is that Alex Jones, Vivek Ramaswamy, presidential candidate, such as he is, Andrew Tate, the accused sex offender and rapist, and really professional misogynist, and Elon Musk have all gathered together on X to talk about who knows what. And this is a few days after Ramaswamy talks about that January 6th was perpetrated by the FBI, that 9/11 is an inside job committed by the government, not by Al-Qaeda. And then CNN has Ramaswamy on with Abby Phillips in primetime television, giving him an hour to spew his nonsense. And my question is about the Trump industrial complex as a whole, the billions of dollars that have been made from the Trump show over the last 8 years, is how do you contain that show? My daughter goes to the University of Iowa, and she just went to see Trump. And I and her roommates, and I'm talking to them. None of them will vote for Trump. But it was like going to the Dave Chappelle show, right? It was like going to see the Kardashians, right? It was an event. It was fun. It was people dressed up. It was a scene. And yet, as I pointed out to her, what's being said there is acutely dangerous. How, how do you address all that? How do you think about that?
I think
How
you
do
have to.
you contain it?
Yeah, I think you have to address it head on. My wife has a theory that until the Kardashians are gone, we will always have the risk of Trump. And I think the point is that this world of reality television from whence he came blurs the lines, and the lines get further blurred when you've got Elon Musk controlling Twitter and promoting conspiracy theories, when you've got conspiracy theorists platformed by CNN, when you've got Fox News selling lies. The vast majority of Americans right now do not see the world as it is. They don't. They see it through distortive lenses, funhouse mirrors. It's not the reality that's actually going on out there. And so we have to fight that at every turn. And frankly, we live in a moment where you can't, because everybody's got a social media platform. Everybody reaches a group of people beyond themselves. Sometimes it's 10 people, sometimes it's via podcast, sometimes it's 10,000 people. There are people who have platforms and they reach millions of people. And all those people can counter program. Everybody who listens to your podcasts can counter program, because via Facebook or via Twitter or via TikTok or via Instagram or via YouTube, they have the chance to go out and reach out and amplify a message of how things really are. I also grew up in central New Jersey, although I like to consider it northern New Jersey. I'm kind of a purist, and I really think there's North Jersey and South Jersey, and never the twain shall meet.
Mhm.
So that's I resist the concept of central New Jersey. But um,
Adopting that, then I would be in northern Jersey,
where'd you grow up?
North Plainfield.
North Plainfield. Well, I grew up 5 minutes from there. I grew up as a little kid in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey,
Uh,
which was just across Route 22 from where you were. And then we moved to Summit when things started to get good. My dad worked at Bell Labs, right? And I grew up in that same environment. And you had two newspaper choices in the morning, the New York Times and the New York Star Ledger. And that was it. And there was a real focus on, all the news that's fit to print. I don't think we fully realize how altered our perception of the world is today from what it was then. Because we see it through social media, because we see it in real time with real time reactions, which are much more fueled by emotion than they are by reflection or perspective. Um, and I hate to sound like some Altacocker who's like, oh yeah, back in the old days it was much better, you know. Um,
but it was much better.
but it was better. It was better because there were fewer platforms. There were more people fighting to have a space on those platforms. So there were standards. And right now, the vast majority of what people see every single day is unfiltered bullshit. And, if you live in an environment where what you see is bullshit, what you read is bullshit, what you're inhaling with every breath is bullshit, then between your ears is going to be bullshit.
So a couple years ago, I went down to one of these festivals. It was South by Southwest or Texas Tribute, and I was on a panel, and the panel was the 6 second soundbite, and the proposition was, right, how do you communicate in a world where, right, the amount of information, right, that's packaged has decreased from a minute 30, to 6 seconds. And other people on the panel were like, well, this is how you do it. And I was the contrarian, right? My point was, obviously you can't say anything in 6 seconds, right? In fact, right, it's less time than the attention span of a mouse. And what it guarantees, if our politics is structured around 6 seconds of nonsensical elocutions, is that the dumbest candidate will win every time. The guy who says, build the wall, Mexico will pay for it. You can say those things in 6 seconds, right? You can't talk about complexity. You can't talk about serious issues, right? In 6 seconds ever, right? And
Well,
so,
but that, that it's compounded by the other factor. And I know this now more than I did before because now I have a company that does podcasting and so forth. What drives the podcast? What drives all of this now is
yeah,
virality. Virality is the issue. And how do you achieve virality?
right.
You touch a nerve. But it's not just that you lose nuance, it's that you have to inflame. So Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a complete lunatic, who's completely incompetent, but occasionally he says stuff that's so crazy that it goes viral. And that gives him power. And so it's not short and sweet. It's short and sick. And that's part of our problem.
Well, and part of the problem too is the lack of, I think is the lack of reading in the society, right? I mean, the reality is that it was a very much, compared to today's standards by numbers of college graduates and people who are working, not with their hands. Um, we have a population that's much more white collar than it's ever been and much less literate than it's ever been, at the same time. And you just know, you look at old photographs, right, of people passively sitting anywhere in any city on any given day. Everybody's reading something, right? They're reading a newspaper, right? They're being informed by a common point of facts. And, today, there's a very, very, very short attention span. People, consume information in short bursts that don't necessarily have any context around them. And, the result is the hollowing out of meaning around a country that's founded on an idea, which is an enormous strategic problem if you're trying to defend the efficacy of the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's compounded by other problems, one of which is a lot of these media are interactive, and that seemed like a really good idea. But you may remember a few years ago, I mean, I was running a magazine at the time, Foreign Policy Magazine. And, we go out, we get on the web, and the first thing you think you're going to do is, well, we'd like to get comments. And of course, the comments didn't just come from thoughtful commentators, they came from lunatics. People started sort of hijacking the platform. And after a while, a lot of media started to say, well, no, we don't want to do that because the comments actually devalue, degrade the quality of the information as opposed to elevating it, which one had hoped that it would do. But Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of those other places, they are interactive. And all of a sudden, everybody thinks that they've got to offer their opinion all the time, you know, that they don't have to spend any time forming their damn opinion. I don't know what it was like in North Plainfield, but in Berkeley Heights or in Summit at 10 o'clock at night, if you walked into my living room, my mom was in one chair reading a book, and my dad was in another chair reading a book or reading a magazine. And they would spend, 2 hours of their night consuming and, thinking and being left with their thoughts. When does that happen? I constantly have people come up to me and they say, I do my best thinking in the shower. And I go, yeah, well, duh, because the average American spends 17 hours pumping stuff electronically into their brains. So it's all receptive and it's not reflective. And the only time you're left alone with your own brain is in the shower. And so I think this leads to kind of national punch drunkenness. We're like sitting there and there's constantly stuff going through and we're responding and our friends are responding. And we're like, well, if I say this, are my friends going to say that? And, how is this going to affect my social standing? And, the consumption of information about our uh, uh, life as a polity, as a society, um, is hijacked by a constant set of other stimuli and other criteria. And so we don't see it the way it ought to be. And if you're strong-willed and intellectually disciplined, you can navigate your way through that. But most people aren't. Most people just want to get by, have a decent life, have a beer, and not feel shitty at the end of the day.
Well, let me ask you this. What is it that has become so repellent with the Democratic Party's brand to so many working class Americans that not so long ago were part of its base, that it's even possible that this MAGA coalition, which I basically view as a coalition of extremism and lassitude, right, that hovers just outside of a majoritarian space between the two. But in a sports league with two teams, which is what our system is, how how can the Democratic Party team be losing to these guys, or be in a position where it's possible to lose to them 8 years on?
Well,
What is not being said that needs to be said from the reservoir, from the spirit, from the core of the Democratic Party, that's lying dormant, that needs to be summoned?
well, I don't want to put all the blame on the Democrats for not communicating well, which they don't, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I would like to say that firsthand in that game in which there are two teams, somebody paid off the refs. So, over the course of the past 40 years, there has been this movement among, group of moneyed people on the right, very intelligently, to um, work state legislatures, work governors, gerrymander districts, get judges put into place, put their thumb on the scale so that they could gain a certain degree of uh, unfair advantage, right? Now, this compounds the unfair advantage that red states were given when the Constitution was written, right? So we're at a moment where effectively now, but certainly in a couple of years, 70%, 70 members of the United States Senate will be elected by 30% of the voters in the United States. And so we have a system that gives disproportionate power to the base of the red states. And so that's
By consequence, though, not by intent.
well, it was a different kind of intent, but it is where we are, right? So all of a sudden, you've got this, a disproportionate power that accrues to you if you live in a less populous state, and you've got um, a bunch of legislatures and other things that have gerrymandered and put in place, judges like the judges that we have now in the Fifth Circuit and so forth, that tend to tip the scales in the favor of the Republican Party when there comes to be a contest. And I think it's important to remember that whatever it is, 7 out of the last state presidential elections, Democrats have won the majority of the vote. Democrats are the majority. It's not that their message is so unappealing that they're a tiny minority. Their message is appealing enough that they're the majority. They're not a majority in the places you need to be a majority in order to win in our system. And that's, the critical issue. And when you look at those places, those swing states, those purple states, then you get into this issue of the Democratic message. And part of it's impossible to overcome because I think we have to be honest with ourselves. The Democratic Party is associated with urban areas, with diversity, with people of color. And there's a lot of racism in the Republican impulse and message. They're repelled by that. They're frightened. They know, they've heard 2043, the majority of Americans will be people who we once called minorities. This period of white male domination of our political system is over.